Welcome to Modern Marketing Messages, the leading podcast discussing the latest and greatest in both online and offline marketing tactics, strategies, and trends. I'm your host, Taylor Karg, marketing content writer at AmericanEagle.com. Today, we're going to discuss how focusing on accessibility in your design processes benefits end users. To do that, I have here with me AmericanEagle.com's very own accessibility expert, Nick Goodrum. Nick, welcome back to the show. You've been a guest a few times before.
Hello, everyone, again.
Yeah.
Again, I could talk on never ending about accessibility. So hopefully people don't get too tired of my voice. But yes.
Definitely not. Can you just kind of introduce yourself a little bit about how long you've been at the company, kind of what your role entails and what your responsibilities are?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, I've been here. Well, it's been a while. It's been about over 13 years.
Oh, wow.
So I've been here for quite some time. And I started out in the front end space. So I was pretty much just, we had a very different name for the position at the time, but it was front end development. And then pretty much I grew into that role over time into more of a leadership, and then actually oversaw the department. And of course, best practices, you want to come up with the best solutions. And something I kind of really realized over time is that, of course, the impact of what I'm making. And we often just think in a bubble of like, oh, I'm just making this website. But the decisions you make and the way you implement things can actually impact how people interact with the website. So one of those best practices was accessibility, right? And so I became one of the major advocates at the company about accessibility. And then it pretty much, I kind of realized we were always kind of reactive, right? Oh, if a client needs it, we can take care of it and we'll handle it. But it kind of realized I was like, no, too many people aren't aware of this, right? And so we really wanted to shift into that proactive approach. And so for quite a few years now, I've been in the accessibility space and focused on a team and just growing that out so that we can just support our clients, support internally, and actually just educate and share.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it seems like maybe you didn't really know that you were going to get into web accessibility, and it kind of just happened over time. And I'm glad, there are people like you out there who are kind of, working to make a difference.
Yep. No, I think most people in the accessibility space did not just go like, that's what I'm going to study. Yeah. That's the thing.
Is there even something you could study? Like, I'm not even sure.
No,
what
most
that
universities, for a long time, it was actually, they didn't even have front end development programs, right? So you always have back end development, and you have these kind of classic, computer science degrees. And only in more recent years did they even get these kind of front end focuses, and even in boot camps. And when I've talked with people from boot camps, times change, right? And it depends on which one, but it'll be like, okay, we spent like 2 months on back end and integration and React and all these things. And we had 2 days of accessibility, if that. And it's like, waiting. I understand you're trying to do all the complex things, but there's a lot more to it.
Yeah. 2 days does not sound like nearly enough time.
Yeah. If that. So, you get some varying there. So, yeah, there's no real place that's actually doing this kind of education. And so everyone's just, hey, passion, interest. And so you'll see most of the people and the advocates and the people out there, it's just, let's interact and let's figure things out. And let's work together on that. So it is definitely a different time than years ago, where the information was also still very limited. There's some, people were sharing, but it was still in a not as mainstream. And I'm starting to see over the years that's just a little bit more mainstream. There's a little bit more, few more voices, a lot more people actually discussing and coming up with solutions. So it's a very interesting time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm glad, that you're here today to kind of tell us all about it. So before we dig into, accessibility and UI design and all that, I wanted to share some statistics that I found that kind of speak to why this is an important topic to cover, especially, as a web design and development company, as we are. So one of the stats that I found, according to Pew Research Center, approximately 75% of Americans with disabilities report using the internet on a frequent basis. Now, 80% of those users, so people with disabilities, report that they would rather buy from a more expensive web shop than one with poor accessibility. And that's according to Site Improve, which is an AmericanEagle.com partner. Mm-hmm. And another stat, according to Site Improve, is that 69% of people with disabilities leave a website immediately if it's not accessible. Are these kind of in line with things that you've been seeing over the years?
I mean, it's kind of true for anyone, right? So it's not even really whether you have a disability or not. I mean, if you went to a store and they're like, well, the doors are closed, I guess I'll just wait here for 2 weeks and hope it opens, right?
Yeah.
No, no, no. You're gonna be like, oh, there's like the same exact store like right over there. I'm just gonna go over there. Thanks for your time, right?
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
that just applies to anything. And in this day and age, right? 20 years ago, you could say, oh, well, oh, you just use the online services and you're like call centers. And I kind of go, well, most call centers now are almost automated. So you would love to talk to a person. Good luck with that,
Yeah.
right? And then, oh, okay, well, you just go in person and go to like brick and mortar stores and you go, well, how I always kind of ask, but maybe that's just my perspective, but it's like, how many people go into like physical travel agencies now versus just going online,
I'm
right?
sure very, very few.
Very few. And so it's a lot about this online presence. And so there, but the benefit is there's just so many options out there. And people kind of go, okay, well, I want to make it big, flashy, and fancy, but I mean, I kind of look at Reddit and some of these places that it's not the fanciest looking site, right? It's not. It's all
Yeah.
about the content, right?
Hmm.
You can only make something so shiny that is actually just a pile of garbage or something like that for like actual content.
Yeah.
Um, so if you've got the good content and you make it so that it actually can be reachable by people, it's just an automatic win. So I always find it interesting when people go like, I don't know, accessibility is not that important. I'm like, okay, there's like, but what it is that mindset is, I don't think anyone's malicious, right? No one's, well, maybe there's some people, but on the most part, right? Everyone just doesn't know any better. And so, but when a lot of times it's that bottom line, right? Oh, well, we've only got so much budget. How are we going to do all this stuff? But there's a lot of wins that if all you focus is on risk mitigation, right? So that's what majority of people are thinking, like, I just don't want to get sued or anything. And I kind of
Yeah.
go like,
Hmm.
yeah, you're just missing out on just all of the benefits from it. And I won't go too deep into it because that's just how my mind works. I'm
Yeah.
already jumping into
Yeah.
all the positives around it because I've just seen so many wins from it. But yeah, the other thing too is, when you think about, oh, well, how many people? It's like, okay, depending on censuses and whatnot, it could be even up to like 26% of people have some form of disability, right? That's that's not a that's not a small number,
No.
right? Now
Yeah.
it's varying degrees and varying
Hmm.
types, right?
Yeah.
Um, but that's quite a large number. And on top of that, you go, okay, well, again, data and whatnot. There's about $490 billion in post-taxable income, at least in the U.S.,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And so I always kind of go, you're leaving selfishness, right? That usually gets people to do things. And
Yeah.
so as
Yeah.
an organization, right, as a company, if you're in the e-commerce space or you're trying to get a product out, or kind of go, well, those numbers alone should automatically be able to easily sell it within a company. I wish it could be just as simple as, hey, it would benefit people, right?
Yeah.
And we wouldn't create these barriers. And that would be an amazing thing. But also they're businesses and there's probably higher up people and there's C-level people you have to make sure, and they have to make decisions on how do I keep the lights on, right?
Hmm.
So I think sometimes just even knowing that information kind of helps that discussion internally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you said earlier. And I think, we'll get more into it as the episode goes on. But, web accessibility isn't just for, people with disabilities, which, yes, it's a large part of that. And we want to make sure we're being inclusive of people with all different kinds of abilities. But, it really is good for just everyone and your entire business as a whole. So
Yeah.
I like that point that you made. That was great. So let's kind of just set the stage for the entire episode. What is web accessibility? Before, we jump even further down this hole, basically, what is web accessibility?
So yeah, and it was interesting as like I said, it's hard for humans to step out of our own shoes. We're in our own lives. We have our own way of doing things, our own habits. So it's not that it's impossible for us to understand. If it's out of sight, out of mind kind of concept,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so web accessibility may seem like, oh, it's this big foreign thing. And it's like, well, no, it's just you want to make sure people with disabilities, very different types of disabilities, can actually just use the web. And some people might go like, oh, well, how would they even use the web, right? And it's not as scary or difficult as people think, right? So it kind of depends on the disability, right? And so you kind of go, okay, well, what are the different ones? So you could have someone with low mobility, right? Then you also have people that might have shaky hands, cerebral palsy, things like that, where it's not uncommon, right? It's not that it doesn't exist or anything like that. No, there's a fair amount of people with these different kinds of disabilities. And you kind of go, well, how would they use the web? Well, the assumption is everyone just uses a mouse. And I kind of go, well, that just forgot, the entire history of computers because, after punch cards, what was the only way you could interface with a computer? And it was like called a keyboard. And
I
then,
was like, wait, what was it?
yeah, it's called a keyboard. And so many site, developers and content creators and site owners and whatnot is like, everything's got to be hover and mouse. That's what everyone uses. And it's like, well, no, there's like majority of people that actually use many other input devices.
Yeah.
And so people with low mobility, there's different levels, right? Different scales on where they are in their journey of that. And so you've got people that might just use keyboards, just basic interfaces, right? And that's already built into browsers and functionality there. Then there's people that might use switches. So that would be kind of even kind of more lower mobility, where maybe only being able to move their hands so much. And that's pretty much kind of a device system that is just a single button, maybe sometimes two buttons. And it pretty much allows it to say like, go through items, everything on the screen over and row by row.
Yeah.
So not fast, but it kind of gets the job done. And then you say stop, and then it would actually select that item. So a little bit oversimplified, but that kind of concept. And then, it could even get into, there's mouthpieces, and then you can even get into eye tracking. So there's just, software that allows to do that. So technology has allowed a lot more options. And that's why, people, reference Stephen Hawking and like, what did he first use as he was going through his degeneration, right? And it's like, by the end of it, it's like, okay, you had mouthpieces, you had eye trackers, you had these other tools. And part of that came with the technology that was available. So it's still easily available, sometimes a little bit more taxing, but it is available for people with different levels of motor skills, right? Then you've got people with low vision, and that's also a huge range, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Huge range. So, even if you are considered legally blind for driver's license, those kinds of things, right? That doesn't mean that you can't see zero. It's not 0 or 100.
Yeah.
There's a huge range in between. And so some people might just only need magnification, all right? And so there's magnification tools. They're even just physical magnifiers, right? And, magnifying glass, oversimplifying, but that kind of glass type structure. And so really they're still interacting with the website just the same way, but just with some level of magnification. But there's also people that maybe can't see at all, or at that lower level that even with magnification is not really possible. And so there's software also available. It's been around for quite some time, but it's matured, which is screen readers, right? And so screen readers, I always kind of explain it as a robot that just is able to kind of go through and parse through the content. The beauty about the web, I think, is that so much has been worked on for standards and just building things so that they're accessible. Because really, if you think about what is the most accessible thing to a degree, and that's digital text, right? A physical book, as a technical person myself, I was like, I just want to hit Control F. I'm like, I want to just find this text, but I was like, I'm just going to have to read through like 1,000 pages and hope I find that one page, right?
Yeah.
So now there's ways of with digital text, you're like, I can find almost anything there. And if you think about the web long time ago, it was mostly just a bunch of text.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the ground layer. And so if you think of it as that way, it's pretty accessible to a majority amount of people because that robot can read that text.
Yeah.
What robots can't do, or, different software can't do is parse images. Well, nowadays that's slowly changing and there's work on that, but it's still in its infancy. So there's still lots of media, a lot of these other things that also need that text-based alternative. And then you've got different kind of cognitive aspects. You've got reading disorders, things like that, where you could, dyslexia, right? Well, they actually might also use a screen reader because they might actually like hearing the words rather than trying to read them themselves.
Yeah.
And then there are people, so that don't necessarily assume everyone with a screen reader must have no vision or anything like that. So there's sighted people that use screen readers as well. I've actually used it myself to actually get past a banking site that didn't actually make a responsive version. So like their form submit button was off screen.
Oh.
And so I just used my device screen reader and I'm just like, boop, boop, boop. Oh,
Trying
there's the submit button. There's the submit button. Okay, sweet. I can accomplish my task. I can continue on my day. But yeah, screen readers are even built into your mobile phones. And there's a lot of accessibility work from iOS, Android. So yeah, there's many different ways. There's also voice dictation, right? Siri itself was had basis in the accessibility space. It was for
Oh,
people
really?
with
Wow.
kind of disabilities, and it was like,
Mhm.
well, this is a good feature for everyone.
Yeah.
Remember that, everyone, right? And that's turned into all these different assistants and everything like that, right? So focusing on accessibility sometimes can even create really positive
Yeah.
outcomes for everyone as a whole, right? There's many different ways people interact with the website, but at the basic level, they're still accessing the same content, the same HTML structures, if you build it correctly. So that's where we get into the pain points, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What many people with disabilities run into, right? You're saying, okay, well, if it's not accessible, I can't even accomplish my tasks, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. I talked about that base, right? You're like, oh, more than 20 years ago. Some time ago, it was just HTML. It was just, well, yeah, it's true. But it was text, just text information and basic links and buttons. And in this day and age, what's kind of slightly gone off the deep end for the concept of, or for the benefit of improved experiences in some ways, is these complex JavaScript frameworks and all these build tools and all this functionality that developers somehow forgot in the past, 20 plus years, what a button was
Yeah.
and what a link was.
And
And
it's funny because I feel like those are, some of the most simple like aspects of developing and building a website. And it's like, when things get so complicated, you forget the small, simple things.
yeah. And so again, we design more complex interfaces, and we design these features that are all based around hover because we assume, again, everyone's using that one input device. So there's a lot of decisions all along that just kind of make these assumptions on what I would put, quote, like typical user, right? So those major quotes there. Because again, there's even temporary disabilities. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of ranges, right?
Hmm.
They just kind of forgot the basics to a degree. So the JavaScript allows you to be like, I just had a click to anything. I can just add that feature to anything. So that div, which is just a generic tag, it's like, that div, you're clickable now. And it's like, how does a keyboard user get to it? Like,
Yeah.
well, I guess I'll add, this extra code. And it's like, well, understand the browser already built in like roles for screen readers. It's brought in keyboard support. It's brought in like all this functionality that everyone just thinks, that's super simple to do. And then they kind of forget that, no, there was actually a lot of work into that.
Yeah. Yeah. Seems like there's a lot of moving parts to all of this.
Yeah. I mean, we've moved into a more media space, right? We've been growing different experiences. So there's a lot more, right? TikTok and all these places.
Yeah.
It's very
Video.
video centric. And so that video aspect is, okay, well, how many people can enjoy video? All right. And again, you've got ranges of disabilities. And so, okay, well, how does a person with low vision access that video content? Right. And so many places forget, oh, yeah, maybe I should, add a transcript. Maybe I should actually have it in text format.
Yeah.
And then, okay, well, if they're deaf, how do they access that? Well, many times people forget to just even put captions in their videos. I think that's why even the social media platforms even kind of give you some options to put in captions.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I think within the last few years, honestly, is when I've started to see it more and more. Is that every video now, mostly, of all the sports posts and influencer posts, they do have captions, which I think is great.
Yeah, and if you also read some of those,
they're very off.
They're very off. So.
Still some work to do.
Still some work to do, and that's where it began because it's reliance on the automation aspect.
Yeah.
But it's still a human aspect, right? Jargon phrases we say all the time that need some explanation. Forgetting the basics is kind of part of it. More complex interfaces, newer media types. So there's a lot of things that to improve the web experience is kind of forgotten some of those things. And same thing where we want parallax and fanciness and everything's totally moving. And I kind of go back into design, right? And I go, well, what's the goal of the design? Is it to look really fancy, or is it to actually accomplish a task?
Yeah.
And so I think that's why you saw in more recent years where there's a bit more minimalism coming into play, is because people realized, oh, instead of making, 11 pixel size font that's super tiny, but with animations and everything going on, people get distracted,
Oh,
and
absolutely. Yeah.
also they kind of get lost, and that applies to everyone. And so if you go back into, okay, what's the end goal? Oh, I want them to be able to click this button to go to this page to find their information to then be able to purchase a product or download this aspect.
Yeah.
And so then they increased font sizes. They made things simpler. You don't want to oversimplify too much, right? And that's why we have then the build back up to this kind of hybrid approach. And so I think designers themselves kind of realized, oh, okay, well, I can actually make this so we can improve conversions, all those kinds of benefits to the company, but also it just makes an easier experience. So
Mhm.
it's getting back into that simplicity.
Yeah.
So, keeping that mindset of accessibility in mind can actually improve that. I don't know if everyone chose it because of accessibility, but it aligns many times. So I think
Yeah.
a lot of designers kind of go, accessibility. It's going to I'm going to be so limited. And it's like, no, you
You're
can,
really not.
you're really not. And even, I mean, there are directors and whatnot of movies that say, well, actually, I like the limitations. I like to be within a little bit of box, because if I had infinite,
Sometimes, yeah, when you have too much, when the world is your entire oyster, it's like, oh my gosh, there's like way too many directions I could take this.
yeah.
I think designers on our team talk about that all the time when they're not given, any direction at all. They're like, I don't know which direction to go.
So even having just some minimal guidelines and some structures to that will actually make it so that the designer's life is easier,
Yeah.
and also consistency. So we as humans, we're used to habit, and so if you go, you know what, today the site header is in the footer, and I'm flipping those, right? And most users are gonna be, I'm very confused on
Yeah.
this setup, right?
Uh-huh.
And so having some of that structure, I know sometimes, oh well, it's kind of limiting on what I can do, but the end goal is to make people be able to feel comfortable with your website, be able to interact with your website, and just be able to easily navigate it. So having those constraints isn't necessarily a problem, right?
Mhm.
It actually helps guide them and makes their life a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's great. And you honestly brought this right into the next question that I had for you. And that is, the main focus of this episode. And so, how does focusing on accessibility in your design process benefit end users?
Yeah, like I said, that sometimes creating and focusing on accessibility um, can really improve the experience for everyone. So I think of it this way. So, we're talking about media, right? And we're
Yeah.
talking about transcripts, and we're talking about those experiences. And so we're going to get into a couple of different wins, right? So, I mean, it's a little bit older data, but, This American Life, which is a podcast. Hey, podcasts. All right, sweet. And,
Podcast inception.
and a few years back, they actually set it up so that they actually had transcripts within the page itself. So it's actually on the same page. Well, maybe you have to press a button to actually display it, technicalities, but it's literally got a dedicated page, and it's tied in with listening in. And then it even has follow along information. So you actually have
Wow.
live, well, you know what I mean? It's pre-recorded, but
Yeah. Yeah.
alongside, following you along through the text. And that's actually quite an enjoyable experience,
Mhm.
because you could be listening in, but you could also be watching. You're like, oh yeah, no, I maybe misheard that, right?
Yeah.
As humans, we've never misheard any information ever.
Absolutely never.
Those songs, I know those lyrics
Yeah.
perfectly. So having that following along, that's benefiting a lot of people. And then it also gets this extra benefit of the search engines, right? So we talk about screen readers being able to go through everything. Well, that's kind of the same thing that Google, Bing, all these places are doing as well with their crawlers. They're
Yeah.
literally just going for that text. They're not going to listen through an hour-long audio and go, I hope they have this information. What am I listening to, right?
Yeah.
No, it's going to be like, okay, give me text. I
Yeah.
can digest that.
And it's all here.
And
Yeah.
it's all here. And so they actually even saw organic increases on users that went specifically to the transcripts, and saw organic growth in their actual web traffic.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So again, wins.
Yeah.
So, focusing on that accessibility, it's not necessarily, oh, I have to just think about just what I can do for compliance. It's like, no, how can I come up with interfaces that are accounting with different user types? And so, yeah, having that mindset can actually create some more ingenious or more interesting concepts. right? So yeah, focusing on accessibility, you can do it in many different ways, but in the design phase, it's more earlier on, right? And so there's probably less about, am I setting up my buttons correctly? Am I setting these things up? It's a lot of it is around contrast, of course. That's something that designers would be in control of. The color spectrums, things like that. I think most people just think of just text though, and they go, okay, is my text enough? And that's journeys of different designers, right? Okay, well, I know that I need to have color contrasted text. Check. All right. All right. Did you account for your graphs? Right. And we see it all the time where you got 3 different aspects that you want to show in a pie chart or in a line chart or these different things. And so many times I just see, okay, blue, lighter blue, darker blue.
Yeah.
And all of them pretty much are, or actually, and even our colors. So it's fun. So they'll do like red and blue.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much the exact same contrast. So if you actually view that in grayscale, it would just be like black and black.
Yeah.
Okay, which line is which?
Uh-huh.
Right? Which part of this pie chart are you talking about? And then the legend uses those same colors, and it'll be like, see, it's obviously this black. And it's this color is obviously this black. So you must know which one this graph is talking about, right? You're like, no. And a lot of times we think about just color alone in our designs for bringing people to your call to actions, right? CTAs, right? Okay, well, I'm just going to make this giant bright blue. But if you actually view it in grayscale, is it actually bringing someone closer? So you
Yeah.
actually can actually take your concept a little bit further by viewing your work inside of grayscale. So you can still have the color, you can still have these concepts, but viewing it in grayscale will kind of give you a sense of, all right, if someone couldn't see color at all, could they easily find the interactions that I wanted? Are they getting the concepts I wanted to create? And so I think just even having that in your pipeline is like, okay, great. All right, I now have a better sense of what some users might be interacting with, right?
Yeah.
Color blindness is usually like single color, but there can be full color blindness as well. And then that contrast, right? We always assume everyone is got amazing devices with perfect, no glare in a perfect room in a void of just nothing else interacting with your experience.
Yeah.
And it's like, but there's also reality. And so, you've got glare, you've got sometimes crappy monitors, you've got these different experiences. And so focusing on color contrast as well. Is it enough to stand out? Is it enough for people to even recognize? I think common people forget is like the inputs, right? And they'll go, I made these really thin gray lines, so it just looks sleek. And you're like, so no one can see them.
Yeah.
The thing that people wanted to interact with. I made a tiny little line at the bottom so people will understand. And you go, it's a line.
Yeah, not working.
Not enough, right? And so, getting back into those accessibility roots, it can help you focus on that conversion aspect. Can people actually accomplish the task? Same thing where it's like, well, then I injected labels, my text inside that input for a 50 input form. And every time you type into any of them, all that text disappears. So you've got 50 inputs that you have to remember what all of them were. And my memory is not that good. So,
No, neither is mine.
So where labels above, right? Focusing on that accessibility side
yeah.
also makes it so you come up with decisions that all users can, okay, oh, that was not my first name. That was my friend's first name. And so on and so forth. That's not my shipping address, that's my billing address, because that mistake could be actually major, right?
Yeah.
So focusing on accessibility can actually come up with just better solutions. And then, yes, I'll just say it right now, and I'll just look at the camera that if anyone's actually watching, please stop with hover. Just please stop. Just
You hear
stop.
that?
Just stop. Again, we get back into those input devices, and everyone goes like, mouse. And you go, well, that's one user type. And literally every user type has a way to click something.
Yeah.
Every user has a way to press something. Doesn't matter the input, using your voice, any of those things. There's a way to literally say, like, press this. Switch that can press this. Keyboard that can hit enter. Touch users. And I still see so many designs where it's like everything hover, navigation hover, flip cards hover, tooltips hover. And I go, what? But that's like one user type.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are still, just reverting back to the hover.
It's tradition. I don't know. It's people for so long were going, yeah, that's the way it is, and that's what I was saying. It's like it feels, you know, WCAG's the WCAG, right? The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They've been around for since 1999, right?
Oh, wow, okay.
It's not new.
No.
No, they've been making changes and adding new aspects, etc. But it's not new. But it kind of felt like in the initial phases, everyone's like, yeah, and then forgot it for the next, 24 years.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think, again, mouse usage became more popular. Keyboards became less aware for different end users. And so it became this, oh, wow, that's really cool. And especially in Web 2.0 or earlier, where it's like, oh, you can hover over things and it does something. That feels new and
And
interesting and
cool, yeah.
cool. And so then that just kind of stayed. I also think there's maybe a little bit of a design concept of, trying to limit the number of clicks, right? So
Oh,
there's
yeah.
the,
Mhm.
oh, you want to reduce the amount of clicks because that can impact
Yeah.
conversions, right? But I always kind of go, I feel, that data is more pointed to the time where each page, each click would mean a whole new page, right? I'd have to click and to find something. That's such a journey, right?
Mhm.
So you'd have to go through, I click on, I think it's my bank, and I think I want a credit card. I think it's general loans. You're like, okay, I think it's under loans and I think it's under personal loans. And then I think it's under this, right? And if you have to go through 4 pages to eventually find what you're looking for and go, whoops, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Now I got to go back,
Yeah.
right? But navigation, if you wanted to find out more about, maybe it's under loans and you clicked on it and you go, okay, well, here's my loan options. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. I'll just go click on another menu. That's literally how you use most software today. Is it under file? No. Is it under menu? Or it's under, edit? No. Is it under view? It is under view. Great.
Mhm.
Hover isn't really necessary for that. And almost all the software everyone uses, except for the web, is click based. Ask yourselves, what software am I using that actually uses hover only for a functionality? And you'll probably go like, nothing.
Yeah.
Everything has to be clicked because that's a form of intent. Because that's the
Yeah.
thing to think about from end users as well. Hover doesn't necessarily mean they wanted you to open that. Focus doesn't necessarily mean they wanted a dialogue to appear in their face.
Yeah.
Scrolling doesn't necessarily mean they want to read another pop-up. All these things aren't really a form of intent. But if I'm going to click on something, I probably want to interact with that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, those kinds of things where it's an accessibility thing, but actually you're going to come up with a ubiquitous solution because you don't even have to worry. And again, your impact as a designer impacts everyone down the road. If you say this is going to be hover based, and then the developers now have to come up with 2 different solutions because now how do I get this to work with keyboards? And touch? How do I account for touch? And they're going to be all fighting each other. You just added a huge amount of effort to the developers to come up with a solution for one decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's often coming even further back, right? It's even into like business decisions and like, but I want people to easily find it. And I always I've been in multiple meetings and with big boards and things like that. And I go, all right, like I said, you want to find out more about loans. You hover over loans. Nothing happens. What will you do? That's a bit rhetorical. And they kind of like, And it's like, maybe one person be like, I'd click on it. And it's like, boom, you just learned how to use a click interface
Yeah.
with no training whatsoever. But now if you do it hover based, okay, how does a keyboard user access it? Okay, well, maybe they have to tab and then on focus. Well, then how does the screen reader use it? Because they don't actually always navigate by tab because that's only by interactive elements.
Yeah.
But they want to read all text. So they might
Mhm.
use like down arrow keys. So they reach it with down, which is not actually triggering the opening. So they'll probably press enter. Guess what? That's just going to take them to a page. That didn't actually open the menu.
Yeah.
How do they use it? How does a touch user use it? Right? It's just that those decisions kind of forget there's just all different ways that people interact. I think it's a lot easier conversation now because it's with mobile, right? And I kind of go and I put mobile in quotes because mobile is a state, right? And I kind of go, most people are not on their phone on the go so much as just
Sitting at home on
doom
the
scrolling
couch.
for like
Yeah.
4 hours on their couch. Is that someone on the go? Is that someone mobile? No, that's just literally just someone trying to access the same level of content.
Yeah.
And then iPads are literally the same size as desktops.
Hmm.
Like the Pro is literally the same size as a laptop.
Yeah.
And so I go, you gotta go like, well, just desktop users get hover. And I go like, well, that's literally touch users as well. So
Yeah.
I think it gets it an easier conversation, but I still see it in the wild of that kind of hover based approach. And I just kind of say, as designers, the ubiquitous, easy to understand, the UX of it is the approach to go.
So we've talked about, I think you've mentioned, a ton of gaps right now as it pertains to accessible UI. We talked about a lot of like color contrast, the hover. Is there any other, gaps as it pertains to accessible UI design that you see kind of like on a frequent basis?
Yeah, I mean, and this one again, stepping out of your own shoes. I was talking about those magnification users, right? The WCAG, right? So WCAG, they even have criteria to try and account for those users. And so one of them is about magnification. And so users should be able to magnify up to 400%. And you go, well, that's really huge. And you go, well, yeah, because eyesight doesn't last forever. And so you need to be able to enlarge your font.
Yeah.
And so if you think about, screen size is like a 1280 by 1024 for like a monitor. Maybe
Hmm.
it's a little bit older, right? 1920s are a little bit more popular now, but it's not that there's zero people using a 1280 monitor. If they magnify to 400%, that's only 320 pixels of space. You're literally getting I put again quotes, mobile or small screen sight. And then 1024. So you shrink that down and then you've got 256 in your height. And have you ever been on a website that likes to have at least 2-3 pop-ups, a sticky site header, a sticky site footer, and a jump to navigation?
Yes.
Probably will not fit in any usable way in a 320 by 256
Probably
space.
not.
It's not even available, like even on mobile devices that are bigger, right? And the big, phablets and all these things, right? Even that's still blocking and sometimes cut off and still not easy to use. So I think a lot of designers still kind of think, okay, I just only need to account for the smallest device that's popular right now, which might be like 370 pixels or 375, and maybe a little bit wider. And you probably see designers going wider and wider and wider because
Yeah.
our phones are continuing to get bigger. But we can't forget that that's just one user type. There's people that are on desktops that might dock their screens. There's people with magnification that want to be able to access the same level of content. And so from that, it's really important to think about what that would look like and how that would function zoomed in. And if you come up with good solutions, then developers are coming up with good solutions, right? So as designers, your decisions can impact down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think about, seeing mock-up designs for things that we're doing. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I give all the praise to developers and how they actually know how to do that and turn these designs into actual usable products. It's
Yeah.
crazy. So we talked about, some gaps as it pertains to accessible UI design. What are some solutions? You kind of mentioned a few in your previous answer, but what are some solutions to fill in those gaps? Like, what are you suggesting?
Yeah. So solutions, right? So yeah, it's just thinking outside of, I mean, that's the simplest, right? If you just start to think, what are the types of users, right? Start coming up with those user stories in your head, right? So someone with low vision, what are they going to use? Okay, well, like we talked about, screen readers. Okay, well, then I want to make sure I have text alternatives, probably for complex graphs. I probably want to have it in some data format that's easy to digest for people that's not so based in visual setups. So maybe it's a table right underneath that explains the same data. So like iOS, for example, I think for their stock market app, they actually have an option that it will actually do sound for the graph shape.
Oh, wow.
So it'll actually like go up and down so
Yeah.
they can kind of get a sense. So it's again thinking outside the box of how could I make this? I could still do the graphical view, but how could I make this so more people could access it, right? But text is still king, and you could also just say, all right, maybe not perfect, but I've got this alternative that is going to actually display the same data. So thinking about okay, how those people might have ways of getting that information, right? And thinking about, okay, how would someone with low mobility access this? And again, maybe I shouldn't do hover. Maybe I should think about how there's different input devices. often, we do, okay, maybe you want that close button on that dialogue. Don't just assume people can hit escape or just click outside of the viewing area, right? And so really, if you kind of hear all these ideas, right, maybe you haven't thought about them or anything like that. And we just talked about magnification, haven't thought
Mhm.
about it, right?
Yeah.
But that's really what fixes it, is if you just think about it, right? Think
Yeah.
about these users, know those types of users. So, and the nice part about all this social media and all this information is there's actually people with disabilities that are literally like vloggers themselves and trying
Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
over their struggles and how they interact with things. And so that might also broaden people's minds on how can I change the way I design something. Um, so yeah, I think that's the core aspect everyone can kind of do, and that would make major improvements because there's a lot to this, but at the same time, every little bit counts.
Yeah.
And so just even getting into those basics will help you out.
You even just answered my next question too, which was, what are things that designers should be looking out for during their process? And I feel like we've kind of mentioned a ton of that
Yeah.
this entire episode. And I think what you just mentioned is that, just putting yourself in the user's shoes.
And I think that's why everyone feels really scared. Like, oh, there's just so much. And yeah, WCAG and these guidelines have very specific things, so you can still mess it up, and you can still, and there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot to it. But at the core, it's just saying, how can I make sure I don't create a bias against people with
Yeah.
disabilities?
Hmm.
And so just knowing what are the different types of disabilities will actually probably benefit you a lot, because you're just going to end up coming with better solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are a few next steps people who are listening can take in terms of, making their website more accessible? And obviously, you just said that. And I think most people know in terms of accessibility, you're never really going to be 100% there. I think, like you said, there's a ton of nuances, there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of considerations. So, what kind of can people do?
Yeah. In the design space, right? We should also talk about maybe a couple different aspects about the designs and the ways to approach designs. So there's, the universal design approach, which is really getting into trying to make a solution. There's like 7 principles, and I'm not going to get into all the
Yeah, yeah,
details about that, but
yeah.
um, it's about coming up with a way that accounts for as many people as possible in one solution. And sometimes that works, right? Um, and sometimes that's not the perfect solution because people need different things, right? So if you think about from a video, right, you can say, well, I'm going to make a video that vibrates and does all these other things all at once to just try and account for all users. And it's like, there's too much to cram into one space.
Yeah.
So then you go, okay, well, then how can they access the sound, right? Okay, well, then captions, right? So the video itself, just the moving pictures and the audio, can be kind of separate. That's not the universal solution. And so then in accessibility focused design, right? So accessible design is then thinking about how can I create these alternatives at times. Sometimes I can do it in a universal way. Maybe I can come, a button is a button. And so if I design it to be a button and it's developed like a button, everyone can use it,
Yeah.
right? So there are times where universal can be done. And then there are times where it's like, all right, well, I need these alternatives because I need the transcripts. I need the closed captioning. I need audio descriptions. I need these other options to account for as many people as possible. And then kind of segueing into this one, which is the inclusive design. And so inclusive design isn't saying that it's somehow better or anything like that. It's more just the method that you do it. And that is to include more people in the process.
Hmm.
And so I kind of go, oh, well, if you're having a hard time thinking about every user, maybe incorporate the users, right? Get them involved in the process. And if you get them involved in the design process, get them to give feedback early on rather than I'm stuck at the door, right? And so this is a concept of shifting left. So that's
Oh,
another,
yeah.
principle that you want to kind of do, which is if you get the feedback early rather than, all right, now I can't use this at all, but we've already spent, thousands of dollars to get to this point. That's going to be a lot harder to change
Yeah.
versus, hey, by the way, like I would just, like this information in this way, and that would be really helpful. Oh, okay. Yeah, let's design it that way. And that accounts for as many people as possible. And great. You don't have that barrier at the door.
So is that what shifting left means is, taking things into consideration a lot earlier in the process than
Yeah.
later?
Yeah. So accessibility, a lot of people just think it's in the testing phase, right? It's in the development testing phase. But as I kind of mentioned, all of these decisions actually happened before that time.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the business analyst and people figuring out what is going to be in your product or in your design, that actually can go even further. So as designers, that's another thing you can do is go bother the person before you.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes in accessibility, it does feel like, oh, how do I get change? And really internally is really the best way to go. But that means voices. And so just simply, you don't have to be an expert. You just have to simply ask, hey, what were the user stories? Right. Who are we accounting for? Because like you said, designers are like, if I get no information, how am I supposed to design this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So even simply doing that question of, so how are we accounting for accessibility in our, business decisions? And if you get ums and ahs, gives you your answer right there. You're like, we probably need to think about this.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets them to think about how that can be incorporated into their structure. And so you start to spread it by just simply asking questions. So don't feel like it's all on your shoulders, right? It's on many shoulders.
Yeah.
I pretty much
Yeah.
say, even internally, I'm like, it's on everyone's shoulders except for maybe the server department. But even then, you could also talk about the physical space of the server racks and everything along
Yeah.
those
Mm-hmm.
lines. So really, it's on everyone's shoulders. So yeah, shifting left will be beneficial. Getting it into your mentality and the design, getting it into people before you will help with the design. And then, of course, just incorporating maybe more end users or people with different backgrounds. That's the inclusivity
Mm-hmm.
into the process will probably end up coming up with a better solution in the long run. And usually actually saves you money and time because you don't have to go back and do it all over again.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure I always do. Every time you're on the show, I learn a ton. And I feel like my wheels are always spinning of like, oh my gosh, I did not really think about any of this stuff in kind of my day to day.
Yeah.
But for our listeners, what is the main takeaway that you want them, to learn from today's episode?
Yeah. And like I said earlier, where information's a lot more readily available out there. So don't feel like you just kind of have to figure out all on your own. I would say just even simply just being aware, right? And just even you can just Google it or Bing it or whatever you end up using for it to search, and you just literally type in the words and you go, okay, design accessibility, and you'll probably get 40 links of checklists and ideas and. But if you just start with that, okay, I need to think about these other users. Think about it in those user stories. Don't just go, okay, even if thinking the BA side, don't just go, okay, as an end user, I want to be able to go to a page, right? Oh, that's really oversimplified. It's probably not that helpful, but like I want to be able to buy my groceries online, and it'd be like, you started with the mobile space. You said, as a person on the go, I wanted to be able to purchase things online. And it was like, well, now just add a person on the go with a screen reader on their phone wants to buy something online, right? And so adding those just key phrases starts getting you to think about it. So just doing a little bit of research online. I'm not expecting everyone to be experts out there, but it's not that scary. And like you kind of even said, it's you kind of, as soon as you start hearing it, you're like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science. It's just needing to open yourself out beyond your own person.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Nick. That was all of the time we had for today. I learned a lot, and I'm really excited for everyone to listen to this episode and also learn a lot from you. So thank you.
No, thanks everyone.
Thank you for listening to Modern Marketing Messages. For more information about the topics discussed today, check out the description of this episode. If you liked the episode, follow the podcast wherever you listen to them to stay up to date with us. While you're at it, give us a rating and share this podcast with others. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Modern Marketing Messages. This episode is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. I'm Taylor Karg, and I'll be back with another Modern Marketing Message.